That number. Just let it sit there for a second. $39 trillion. If you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 90,000 years to spend that much. That is the debt of one country. And yet, that same country sets the interest rates that determine whether you can afford your mortgage. It controls the currency your salary is measured in. It decides how expensive your groceries are, even if you have never set foot in America. This is not just a story about American debt. This is a story about a system so deeply embedded in the global economy that every country on Earth is playing by rules they did not write. Rules created over one weekend in a hotel in New Hampshire in 1944. And the people who wrote those rules had absolutely no idea what they were actually building. This is a story about money, but more than that, it is a story about dependency, about how the United States built the most powerful financial system in human history, how it got rich beyond anything the world had ever seen, and then how it got stuck. Because here is what most people never understand. The dollar's power does not come from America being strong. It comes from the rest of the world being unable to function without it. That is a very different thing. By the end of this video, you will understand why the richest, most powerful nation on Earth is also trapped inside a system it cannot escape. To understand how we got here, you need to understand just how broken the world was in 1945. Germany's economy had collapsed entirely. France had been occupied for 4 years. Britain, the former center of global finance for over a century, had spent everything it had. The British pound had been the world's reserve currency since the 1800s. The pound was how global trade worked, how the entire British Empire managed its economy across dozens of countries. And now it was gone. Not weakened, gone. But one country had experienced something completely different. The United States had entered the war late. Its cities had never been bombed. Its factories had never been destroyed. In fact, the war had done something almost perverse. It had supercharged American industry. Between 1939 and 1945, the American GDP nearly doubled. American factories were supplying the entire Allied world: weapons, food, steel, machinery, medicine, and they were being paid for all of it. By 1945, the United States held approximately 60% of the entire world's monetary gold supply. 60% in one country. Because in 1945, gold was still the ultimate foundation of financial trust, and the country that held most of the world's gold held the keys to the global economy. It was July 1944. The war was not even over yet, but the most powerful economies in the world had already started planning for what came after. 44 countries sent representatives to a mountain hotel in New Hampshire. Their mission: prevent what had happened after the First World War. Because after the First War, the financial chaos had been catastrophic. Hyperinflation in Germany so severe that people needed wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Many economists believed that financial instability had directly contributed to the rise of fascism. They were not going to let that happen again. Two men dominated the conference. John Maynard Keynes, arguably the most influential economist of the 20th century, represented Britain. His proposal was bold: create a completely new international currency. Not dollars, not pounds, something neutral. He called it the Bancor. The idea was elegant. Every country would trade against this neutral currency. No single nation would have an advantage. It was genuinely fair. Harry Dexter White had a different idea. The dollar. Why invent something new when the most trusted, most gold-backed currency in the world already existed? Keynes argued. He warned that placing one country's currency at the center of the global system was inherently dangerous. What happens, he asked, when that country's domestic interests conflict with global needs? He was right, and he lost. Because Britain was broke. You do not win arguments when the other side is the only one funding your recovery. So the system was built. Every major currency fixed to the dollar fixed to gold. $35 per ounce. Guaranteed. If you held dollars, you held the same thing as gold. And for about 20 years, the system worked almost perfectly. Almost. The late 1940s and 1950s were, for America, an era of extraordinary and almost unprecedented wealth, and the Bretton Woods system was a massive part of why. America imported more than it exported. It spent dollars abroad, and those dollars did not come back home because every central bank in Europe, Asia, Latin America wanted to hold dollars. Dollars were as good as gold, so they held them. Europe rebuilt, Japan industrialized, South Korea modernized, all with American dollars flowing through the system like oxygen through lungs. And America got something extraordinary in return. In 1965, the French finance minister coined a phrase that perfectly captured what was happening. He called it America's exorbitant privilege. Every other country had to actually earn its currency through exports, through production, through labor. But America could simply print dollars, and the world would accept them. This privilege funded everything: the space race, the interstate highway system, the Cold War military buildup, massive social programs on a scale no country had ever attempted before, all financed, in part, by the rest of the world's willingness to hold American paper. But there was one problem quietly building in the background, one number that nobody wanted to talk about. Remember, the dollar was backed by gold. The promise written into the Bretton Woods Agreement was explicit. If you hold dollars, you can exchange them for gold anytime you want. And throughout the 1950s and 1960s, countries started doing exactly that. Charles de Gaulle was not a man who trusted American promises. In 1965, he sent a French warship to New York, loaded it with dollars, and demanded gold in exchange. He was not breaking any rules. That was literally the deal signed in 1944. But he was testing it, and every other country watched and started quietly doing the same. By 1971, the United States had less than $10 billion worth of gold left in reserve, but it had printed over $50 billion now circulating around the world. The math no longer worked. The entire world was holding a promise that could not be kept. And then, on a Sunday evening in August 1971, Richard Nixon went on television. With almost no warning to America's allies, he announced that the United States was ending the gold standard, effective immediately. No more gold conversion. The dollar was now backed by nothing except trust. European governments were furious. The German finance minister called it a catastrophe. But here's the thing almost nobody talks about. The dollar did not collapse. In fact, it eventually got stronger. Because in the months and years that followed, America made a deal that replaced gold with something even more powerful. In 1973 and 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia. He sat down with King Faisal, and he made an offer that would reshape the global economy for the next 50 years. America would provide Saudi Arabia with military protection, advanced weapons, guaranteed security. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would agree to only sell its oil in US dollars and would use its influence to convince the rest of OPEC to do the same. Oil is the absolute foundation of the modern economy. Every factory, every vehicle, every power station, every cargo ship that carries global trade, all of it runs on oil. And now, all of it required US dollars to purchase. Suddenly, every country on Earth needed dollar reserves, not because of any signed agreement, but because without dollars, you could not keep your economy running. The gold standard was gone, but the oil standard had replaced it. And in some ways, it was even more powerful, because you could physically run out of gold. But the world's addiction to oil, that was not going anywhere. The dollar was no longer backed by a metal in a vault. It was backed by the global economy itself. And that is when the trap really closed. In the early 1960s, a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin sat before the United States Congress, and he warned them. His argument was devastatingly simple. If the dollar is the world's reserve currency, then the rest of the world needs dollars to trade, to save, to function at all. And the only way to supply the world with enough dollars is for the United States to spend more than it earns, to run deficits permanently, forever, without end. But here is the paradox. If America runs those deficits forever, the debt grows. And eventually, the world starts losing confidence in the dollar. But if America stops running deficits, the world runs out of dollars.
Global trade ceases, credit freezes, economies contract. Either path leads somewhere bad. That is the trap. That is what economists call Triffin's dilemma. Congress listened to Robert Triffin. They thanked him, and they did nothing. Because there was nothing to do. The system was already built. Changing course would have been more destructive than staying on it. Today, the United States national debt exceeds $39 trillion, and it grows by roughly $3 billion every single day. Not primarily because American politicians are irresponsible, but because the global system structurally requires it. Robert Triffin predicted this 60 years ago. He was right about everything.
September 2008. Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. Within days, credit markets across the entire globe froze. Not just in America, in Iceland, in Ireland, in South Korea, in Brazil, in Australia. Countries that had done nothing wrong. Banks that had never touched a single American mortgage. All connected. All falling together. Because the entire global financial system had been built on a foundation of American financial instruments. The Federal Reserve pumped trillions of emergency dollars into the global financial system, not just to save American banks, to save the entire global economy from seizing up completely. And it worked. But look at what the solution required. More debt, more dollars, more printing. The cure for a crisis caused by too much dollar-denominated debt was more dollar-denominated debt. Then it happened again, 12 years later. COVID-19 shut down the global economy in a matter of weeks. The Federal Reserve injected more money into the global economy in 6 months than it had in its entire previous 100-year history. 6 months, 1 century of money creation. Doubled. And now you understand why prices went up everywhere. Not just in America, everywhere. Because the dollar is everywhere. When you print more dollars, everything priced in dollars costs more, including things in countries that had no say in the decision whatsoever. In recent years, something has been quietly happening. Countries are starting to ask a question that was never supposed to be seriously asked. Do we actually need the dollar? China and Russia have been settling growing portions of their trade in Chinese yuan, entirely bypassing the dollar. Saudi Arabia, the very country whose oil deal in 1974 created the petrodollar system, has publicly floated the idea of accepting yuan for oil sales. The BRICS nations have had serious, high-level discussions about creating an alternative reserve currency. This process has a name: de-dollarization. And while it is moving slowly, it is moving. But here is what the headlines almost always miss. Dethroning a reserve currency does not happen quickly. It barely happens in a generation. The British pound lost its reserve currency status slowly, painfully, over 30 years of economic decline and 2 world wars. And for de-dollarization to truly succeed, the world needs an alternative. Something trusted enough, deep enough, stable enough, liquid enough. Right now, that alternative does not exist. The Chinese yuan is not freely convertible. China tightly controls its capital flows, the very opposite of what a reserve currency requires. The euro has deep structural divisions. No cryptocurrency has achieved the trust or scale required, which means for now, however uncomfortable it is for everyone involved, the world is still running on a system designed in a New Hampshire hotel 80 years ago. This is not abstract. When 12 people in a room in Washington, D.C. raise interest rates, your mortgage payment goes up, your business loan becomes more expensive, your country's currency shifts in value. Even if you have never lived in, visited, or had any direct connection to the United States. When there is a dollar shortage in global credit markets, trade slows. Commodities become harder to purchase. Prices spike in countries that had absolutely nothing to do with the cause, not because of anything your government did, but because of a system you never voted for and were never asked about. Understanding this system does not give you the power to change it, but it gives you the ability to see it clearly, to understand why things cost what they cost, why crises spread the way they spread, why the decisions of one central bank affect the price of bread in countries 10,000 miles away. The United States became the world's banker, not through military conquest, not through pure ambition, but by being in the right place at the right time with the most gold. And in the 80 years since that hotel in New Hampshire, it built something so deeply embedded in the structure of global civilization that dismantling it would cost the entire world more than simply maintaining it. That is power. Not the power to do whatever you want,
the power to be indispensable. And the trap is that indispensability runs both ways. The world cannot function without America's currency, and America cannot stop supplying it. The system works, for now, until it doesn't. And when that day comes, it will not just be America's problem.